Quick content warning for you all, there is a reference to attempted suicide in this video. I will timestamp in the description below when it will come up, and I'll also display it on the video itself if you wish to skip over that section. Sometimes something can inspire you just out of nowhere. I didn't think when scanning the bands of Bloodstock 2024 ahead of the festival I would begin quite the musical experience. Let's talk about Ankor and their new album, Shoganai. Ankor are a band based in Catalonia, Spain, but their members come from all over, with guitarist David and Fito and bassist Julio from Catalonia, but their drummer Eleni coming from Greece, and their vocalist Jesse coming from Bristol, UK. The band have been around for a while, with their earliest releases dating back to 2011. Ankor began as a somewhat standard alternative metal band, and I don't mean that as a slight. It has its fans, and at the time I'm sure it would have gone down really well. It has its moments for sure. White Dragon from 2019 is decent, but for sure it didn't have an impact on me like today's album did, but I won't go too deep into all that. It's not really my vibe, so it wouldn't be fair for me to start picking holes in it. Prior to Shoganai, the band had released 5 studio albums, yet started to gain more traction after releasing covers of popular songs such as Billie Eilish's Bad Guy and Havana by Camilo Cabello. I thought we were past the era of metal bands covering pop songs, but I guess not. Duh. Again, not a slight, I love a good cover, they can be fun, and with the style of metal these days leaning more towards a pop-centered sound, Ankor seemed primed to dive into the current trend. Not only have they done so, they have gone big with it, and it's lasted over 2 years. The new album, Shoganai, has not been built up to in the traditional sense. Every track, with the exception of the intro, has been released between December of 2022 all the way to the date of the album's full release, and each song had an accompanying music video which all fell into each other to tell a complete story. It's a 2-year-long release schedule that you don't see done very often. Let's take a deeper look at Shoganai and Ankor's radical approach to its release.
It's your blood on my hands.
Ankor's music on this album finds itself in that current trend of incorporating sounds, notably the synthy electronic stuff, from popular music and blending it with down-tuned heavy metal. Essentially, it's not a million miles away from the spirit box kind of metalcore. I have seen it mentioned before how much of this album does have an air of spirit box about it, and I am inclined to agree. However, in my personal experience, I much preferred this album to anything Spirit Box have ever done. I wasn't as taken with the first Spirit Box album as everyone else was. I did like their last EP, so maybe they will impress me more going forward, but essentially I have always considered Ankor to be Spirit Box, but better. Darkbeat is probably the most obvious example of this similarity. When that verse first kicks in, it has that trademark djenty riffing before the electronic part is weaved in underneath. It also has a huge chorus that goes really hard, and the song just on the whole has a huge impact. It was the first song I heard from Ankor, and I'm sure it will be for a lot of listeners, being the first chapter of this album. It does a good job of hitting you hard right from the off, but from there, you get a different vibe from every other song on the album. Shoganai does so much in its 30-minute runtime. While it is consistent in its style of metal, the band manages to make each song feel unique from one another. While I'm not going to go on that rant about how all metalcore sounds the same, I do remember for a while it seemed like a lot of that subgenre was becoming quite creatively stagnant. So I really love here how on Shoganai every song attempts to be distinct from each other. We have tracks like Venom that are much heavier with genty riffs, but also more straight vocal delivery compared to the more anthemic and expected dark beat. Also, Stereo has a more of a dance vibe to it, and the closing track, Shoganai, ticks all my boxes for bringing in some symphonic elements into the mix. It makes every track feel integral to the whole package. I know it's only 30 minutes long, so having good pacing is perhaps easier than a full-length release, but this is such an easy album to listen to front to back. I usually listen to albums in full, but I've heard Shoganai in full repeatedly since the whole thing came out. Despite each song yearning to be different, it is very thematically consistent and flows together expertly. Tying it all together is the awesome vocal work of Jessie. She can do the harsh vocals, but also the epic cleans to create amazing presence. Not to take away from the rest of the band, of course, they all absolutely bring it. I know we're not talking about live shows here, but I did see this band at last year's Bloodstock, and their guitarists are insanely energetic, and the riffs we get between the genty down-tuned power chords are amazing. I can never get enough of the guitar break in the track Stereo, it just completes me. Oh, and also just in general, Eleni on the drums is a goddamn machine. On every track on their YouTube, you can find a good amount of people claiming each track to be their favourite, and I can see why in every single case. For me personally, my favourite is Stereo. I love the video, I love the guitar as I mentioned, and I love the dance break outro that just climaxes the whole thing. But I also love the epic chorus in Oblivion, it carries so much weight. The music itself, while as always is the most vital component here, it's not the whole story. Shoganai has been built up over a period of nearly 2 years, and the way Ankor have done this has been the real joy of experiencing this album. Every song on the album has a video, and they've all been steadily released over nearly 2 years. It began with Prisoner, released on December 15th, 2022, and the last song, the title track, released on October 23rd of this year, the day of the full album's release. One criticism I will give though right off the bat, the first 3 songs were not released in order. We got Prisoner, Chapter 2, first, then we got Oblivion, Chapter 3, and then we had Darkbeat, which was Chapter 1. After that point they started coming out in order, but why didn't it start that way? I'm sure there's some behind the scenes distribution reason, whatever, as to why, but still was a bit weird. Also, spoiler warning right now, I will be talking about parts of this narrative so that I can explain what I think about it. Go watch the chapters on YouTube now, it's only a 30-minute album, go watch it, and then come back. Piecing together this slowly evolving narrative was such a unique experience to go alongside the release of the music. It felt like we were waiting for the next episode of a TV show, and the wait between chapters was part of the fun. To go off on a bit of a tangent here, I hate the binge watching model that dominated streaming for a while. The whole series of a show would be released in one go. It took away from what I always thought was one of the best parts of a series format, the wait between episodes. You had that sense of anticipation and excitement for what came next. You can't do a cliffhanger if the resolution is already there ready for you to watch. Game of Thrones would not have been the juggernaut it was were it not for the fan discussion between episodes. Shoganai was the anti-binge model. Let's make them wait for what comes next, and man was it effective. Okay, so it's not a particularly deep story with twists and turns. While some interpretation had to be used, it was a pretty clear story of someone witnessing something terrible, dealing with the trauma and guilt, hitting rock bottom, and coming out the other side. But by pacing it all out, it allowed the viewer to go away from each release and marinate on what they had just witnessed. Taking time to process what you've just listened to or watched or experienced is underrated in my opinion. You find so much more of a connection to something by letting it simmer rather than quickly moving on to whatever's next. The anticipation for the next part of the story wasn't so much what the story was, but how it would be portrayed, what music and imagery would accompany the next stage of the story. The narrative, both visual and audible, was part of the experience, and that extra dimension made this album so much deeper. A great example of how this works is the end of Chapter 3, Oblivion. It ends on a somewhat hopeful note after something horrific has just happened, but we know it isn't the end, we know there are more chapters to come, so you have to speculate on what exactly is going to happen next. Given how dark everything has been up to this point, it likely will be in that vein, but you don't know that. You have to be patient and wait to find out. Also, I hate to keep bringing up the song Stereo, but it really just did everything right for me. In the story, our protagonist has survived suicide. They now return to their life and try to continue, but throughout it all they have two figures trying to guide them. One trying to keep them positive and okay, the other trying to be destructive, and even suggesting again that they tried to take their life on a number of occasions. It's heavy stuff, and not to bring personal experiences into this too much, but it rang very true for me. Coming back from attempted suicide is a push and pull. You don't survive and now you're suddenly happy again. You have this voice, yes, that is telling you to make the most of the life that you now keep getting to live and helping you to get through that, but there's another voice shouting just as loud telling you to try again. It's a depiction I haven't seen presented so viscerally, and it really struck a chord. The whole thing culminates with the stunning title track, which mostly features our protagonist pouring their emotions out straight to the listener, and one of the most satisfying parts of the entire package when we get a lyrical reference to every song that has led us up to this point. It completes the package. Everything has led up to this moment. We then move on to our final takeaway of this story. Our protagonist, with bags packed, ready to move on to something else. We don't know what that is, but we know they are going somewhere away from this place, both physically and mentally. Right from the first song, the goal they are aiming for is spelled out.
How can I cross a broken bridge? How can I let what time is torn apart? I need to make it to the other side.
They've achieved that in the end, but we're not told if this is indeed the happy ending. It may be hopeful, it may be scary, but they are making that step of moving on, and that is what they needed most at this point. But this is just my interpretation of what I watched and heard. I'm eager to hear what you all took from this story. So if you haven't heard these songs yet, let me know if this narrative had an impact on you in the same way that it did for me. Does this still work without the wait between songs? Does Shoganai still work as a satisfying arc from beginning to end if listened to straight for the first time? I know this kind of thing isn't new, releasing music videos sequentially that have a running narrative, but I don't think I've heard a whole package of music that has had this much attention to being a complete experience as this. Even if I didn't like the music, I would be impressed with how this is constructed. It's not just 8 songs, it's 8 parts of a 2-year experience. Ankor's Shoganai has been a wonderful release to have followed for so long, and in a world where music is so saturated at this point, I'll always respect a band that does something extra to enhance their art. I loved their set at Bloodstock this year, I'll be seeing them again in Bristol this February and I'm very excited for it. They better play this in full and in order. I've tried to expand my metal horizons in recent years, or at least not dismiss something because it's from a subgenre that I may not have previously enjoyed. There was a time where I would have heard what Ankor are doing and probably not given them the time of day. But what I've learned from the last couple of years of doing music journalism as a hobby is that if you take the time to check out as much music as you can, a sudden burst of inspiration can hit you from absolutely anywhere. I like to think Ankor's album would have grabbed my attention from the music alone, but truthfully, the way the band have crafted the release of this story has inspired me to no end. I feel so lucky that I discovered them early enough so that I could watch the story unfold, and I cannot wait to see what journey Ankor take us on next.
Reach on, take